The hydroponics bay hummed with a gentle, almost rhythmic thrum, a counterpoint to the distant whir of the terraforming machinery outside. Here, in the relative sanctuary of the research facility, Elias Vance felt almost at peace. The fluorescent lights cast a pale glow over rows of alien flora, their leaves a symphony of bizarre shapes and colors. It was a far cry from the dusty, often chaotic reality of the Xylos colony, which was still more a collection of prefabricated modules than an actual settlement. Elias, a man of medium height with a slightly receding hairline and the perpetually amused look of someone who spends too much time with plants, adjusted his safety goggles. At 42, he had long since embraced the role of the slightly eccentric botanist. He was tracing the delicate veins of a newly discovered bioluminescent plant, which had an almost hypnotic glow. It looked like a cross between a sea anemone and a Venus flytrap, with a captivating, ethereal beauty. Fascinating, he murmured to himself, his breath fogging slightly on the cool glass of the containment unit. The bioluminescence seems to be tied to some kind of vibrational energy? And those cilia, almost sentient. He reached for his datapad, fingers dancing over the keys as he entered his latest observations. He was lost in the familiar comfort of his research, the rhythmic click of the keyboard almost soothing. He'd come to Xylo seeking a respite from the endless demands of Earth, a place where his nerdy passion for botany could finally take center stage, and for a good part it had. A faint telepathic nudge brushed his mind, like a soft breeze. Elias, the voice was smooth, melodic, and resonated with a deep, almost physical presence. It was HFY La, his frequent, if non-corporeal, conversationalist. Good morning, HFY La, he thought back, a small smile playing on his lips. Enjoying the morning sunbeams? Or the lack thereof here? The reply was delayed, and lacked the usual warmth and playful teasing that had become their norm. I am observing fluctuations. Elias frowned, lowering his datapad. Fluctuations? What kind of fluctuations? He glanced towards the viewing window of the hydroponics bay. The Xytharian habitat, a shimmering structure of polished metal and organic-looking tendrils, was usually a hive of activity. Today, it seemed strangely still, almost subdued. In the electromagnetic field. And the life force. HFY La's thought was slightly fractured, as if they were experiencing some discomfort. Unusual. Okay, that's not good, Elias muttered, his mind already racing. Are you okay? Should I come over? He was aware of a growing unease that had nothing to do with the data in front of him, a feeling that something was off. He had learned to trust HFY La's strange intuition. They rarely made contact like this, in this detached manner. Usually, it was full of good-natured banter and playful exchanges. Negative. I require containment. HFY La's thought was almost a whisper, laced with an unfamiliar urgency. He blinked, surprised by the abruptness of the communication. Containment? What do you need to be contained from? Before HFY La could reply, the door to the hydroponics bay slid open with a hiss. Standing in the doorway was Maya Rodriguez, a fellow human colonist, her dark hair pulled into a messy bun. She wore the standard-issue jumpsuit, though she had personalized it with an array of patches from various planetary expeditions. Hey, Elias, she said, her voice echoing slightly in the high-ceilinged space. Did you hear about the solar activity report? She waved a crumpled sheet of paper. They're saying we're about to get smacked with a Class X flare. Elias's gaze flicked from Maya to the strange, almost melancholic silence from HFY La. Class X? That's rather dramatic. Yeah, tell me about it. They're evacuating non-essential personnel to the underground shelters. You should probably pack up your plant babies. She gestured around with a slight smirk. And maybe grab a snack. There might be a long wait. Elias ran a hand through his hair, feeling a sudden knot of tension in his gut. Right, snacks. Priorities. He tried to sound casual, but the shift in HFY La's mental communication was a red flag, a strange dissonance that he couldn't shake off. He tried to reach out telepathically again. HFY La? Are you there? What's going on? He received nothing. Everything okay? Maya asked, her brow furrowing slightly. You look like you've seen a ghost. Just a bit distracted, he said, forcing a smile. You know, botanist brain. Always thinking about photosynthesis and the secret life of roots. Maya chuckled. Right, well, don't let those roots get you too distracted. There's supposed to be some really weird electromagnetic stuff happening with this flare. Tech's going to go haywire. She patted him on the shoulder, her touch firm and reassuring. Come on. Let's go. Right, Elias said, his gaze drifting towards the window of the Zytharian habitat again. The structure still looked unusually silent, almost ominous. He was no longer thinking about plants or photosynthesis. He was thinking about HFY and the strange urgency he'd felt in their last communication. He quickly started to pack up his equipment, his mind buzzing with a strange mixture of scientific curiosity and something akin to concern. He grabbed his well-worn satchel and followed Maya towards the exit, casting one last, lingering glance at the silent Zytharian habitat. He had a bad feeling, a sense that this solar flare was going to be far more disruptive than any meteorological report could predict. Maybe bring a good book, or 3, for those underground shelters, Maya joked, nudging him playfully. They're usually a bit of a bore. Elias managed a weak smile, his mind already a million miles away, wondering what exactly was going on inside that silent Zytharian habitat, and if his unique friendship with a tentacled alien was about to get a whole lot more complicated. As they walked towards the exit, a low hum started to build in the air, and the fluorescent lights flickered ominously, the first clear sign that the quiet before the storm was coming to a dramatic end. The world outside the research facility was quickly descending into chaos. The promised Class X solar flare had arrived with a vengeance, bathing the sky in an eerie, pulsating glow. The usually clear, pale blue sky of Xylos was now a swirling canvas of electric purples and angry oranges, like a cosmic bruise. The terraforming machinery, previously a constant background hum, was now sputtering and screeching, its once reliable system succumbing to the electromagnetic onslaught. Elias, along with Maya and a handful of other bewildered researchers, hurried through the corridors, heading towards the designated underground shelters. The air was thick with a palpable sense of unease, punctuated by the occasional crackle of static and the frantic shouts of technicians attempting to maintain order. The lights flickered erratically, casting long, dancing shadows that made the whole place feel like the set of a low-budget sci-fi horror film. This is not ideal, Maya yelled over the growing din, her voice strained. They said the shelters were fully shielded, but it's already feeling like a bad rave in here. Elias nodded, his eyes scanning the surroundings, but his mind was elsewhere. He tried to reach HFY again, desperately trying to establish mental contact, but the usual smooth connection was now a chaotic jumble of static and fractured thoughts. It was like trying to listen to a radio station through a broken antenna. Suddenly, a piercing scream echoed from the nearby Zytharian habitat. It was a sound utterly unlike anything Elias had ever heard, a raw, primal sound filled with a strange mixture of pain and intense energy. It sent shivers down his spine, setting his teeth on edge. What the hell was that? A young researcher named Ben stammered, his face pale. Sounded, not Zytharian, Maya muttered, her hand hovering over the emergency comms on her wrist. Should we report it? Elias' heart was pounding in his chest. He knew that sound. He didn't understand it, not entirely, but he knew it was HFY. And he also knew that it was not a cry of pain. It was something else. He broke away from the group, heading toward the habitat, the others calling out behind him. Elias, where are you going? Get back here! Maya shouted, but he ignored them, adrenaline coursing through his veins. He reached the main entrance to the Zytharian habitat, the door controls sparking and sputtering uselessly. He didn't hesitate, he grabbed the manual override, yanking the heavy metal panel open with surprising strength. Inside, chaos reigned. The interior of the habitat, usually a place of ordered tranquility, was now a swirling maelstrom of light and movement. HFY was at the center, their iridescent skin flaring with an intense, otherworldly glow, changing rapidly between shades of deep purple, electric blue, and fiery orange. Their 3 tentacled arms were flailing wildly, knocking over delicate scientific instruments and sending shards of shattered glass flying across the room. The very air around them crackled with energy. HFY! Elias yelled, his voice barely audible above the roaring electrical feedback. He took a step closer, his scientific curiosity warring with a growing sense of alarm. HFY turned towards him, their large, multifaceted eyes wide and unfocused. Their expression, usually so calm and composed, was now a wild mix of primal intensity and something that Elias recognized, with a mixture of disbelief and a surprising jolt of something that felt suspiciously like desire. Elias? HFY's thought slammed into his mind, not as a gentle caress, but as an intense, almost overwhelming force. Mating cycle, triggered. Requires. Their words were fractured, raw, almost feral. Chosen? Elias's mouth went dry. He had read about Zytharian mating cycles, of course, as any diligent botanist would. But the dry, academic description on his datapad had failed to convey the sheer, overwhelming force of it all. It was like looking at a hurricane and trying to understand it through the lens of a weather report. He realized with a jolt of something that might be described as panic that HFY was not merely experiencing a reproductive urge. They were in the throes of a full biological imperative, and he, somehow, had been selected. Chosen, even. And judging from the look in those wild multifaceted eyes, it wasn't an election anyone could opt out of. Before he could even process the implications, one of HFY's tentacled arms shot out, wrapping around his waist with surprising strength. He was yanked forward with incredible force, the breath knocked out of him. He collided with HFY's body, their iridescent skin burning against his own as if touching a live wire. Whoa! Elias yelled, his arms flailing uselessly as he was lifted off his feet. This is not part of the terraforming treaty, is it? HFY's response was not a rational explanation, but a fierce, almost possessive grip, their other 2 tentacles wrapping around him like living straps, holding him securely against their chest. The mental static intensified, and he could feel HFY's emotions, a turbulent mix of raw desire, urgent need, and a strange kind of almost possessive affection. It was overwhelming, disorienting, and strangely exhilarating. He couldn't believe that HFY's mating cycle was essentially turning him into a living, breathing, human sex toy. The absurdity of the situation was not lost on him. Okay, this is intense, he managed to say, his voice breathless. Look, I understand that you're going through some biological stuff, but maybe we can talk about this? Have a cup of chamomile? A cuddle? Maybe? HFY's only response was a low, guttural sound that vibrated through their entire body and straight into Elias's chest, making his teeth rattle. He suddenly got a feeling he's not getting any chamomile tea anytime soon. Before Elias could formulate a more coherent protest, HFY surged forward, tearing a hole through the side of the habitat with shocking ease. Metal groaned and shattered, and a blast of wind and debris engulfed them. HFY, with Elias clutched tightly in their grasp, leapt out into the chaos of the storm, their iridescent skin glowing brighter than ever. They didn't seem to notice the debris or the flying scraps of metal. They were solely focused on Elias. Where are we going? Elias yelled, clinging on for dear life. Are we eloping? HFY didn't answer, their focus was purely on the immediate need. The only thing that registered in Elias's brain was the wild thrill of being held captive by an alien who seemed intent on making him a willing participant in their bizarre mating ritual. As they soared through the chaotic landscape of Xylos, Elias realized that his quiet life of botanical study had just taken a sharp turn into the most unexpected, and frankly, terrifyingly exciting adventure of his life. The solar flare was causing havoc, but nothing compared to the chaos that was now unfolding around him. He really hoped that the research facility had some good insurance. And perhaps more importantly, a really good lawyer to deal with this intergalactic mating fiasco. The wind whipped around them, tearing at Elias's jumpsuit as HFY carried him through the ravaged landscape. The once familiar terrain of the colony outskirts was now a blur of uprooted trees, twisted metal, and shimmering energy fields. The solar flare was still raging, and the sky was a terrifying spectacle of swirling colors, making it seem like they had somehow been transported into the middle of an alien art project gone horribly wrong. Elias, still held firmly in XYLR's grasp, tried to process the sheer absurdity of the situation. He was being carried away by a tentacled alien in the throes of a mating frenzy, all while the planet was being bombarded by a solar flare. It was the kind of scenario that would normally only exist in his wildest, nerdy daydreams. Except this was happening in real time, and it was significantly less romantic than any of his mental fictions. "Okay, so, new plan," Elias yelled, his voice barely audible above the wind. "Perhaps we can start with a little less enthusiastic grip and maybe some form of rudimentary communication." He knew it was futile, but it was worth a try. XYLR, however, seemed to be operating on a different plane of existence, their focus entirely on the urgent biological imperative driving them. Elias could feel their emotions, raw and intense, flooding his mind. It was a confusing mix of desire, possessiveness, and a strange kind of vulnerability that he hadn't sensed before. It was like trying to navigate a raging river blindfolded. They landed with a surprisingly gentle thud in a small, sheltered hollow formed by a cluster of large, bioluminescent fungi. The fungi cast an eerie, soft light, turning the hollow into a strange, almost otherworldly haven. XYLR carefully lowered Elias to the ground, their movements still quick and jerky, but now tinged with a cautious tenderness. "All right, this is certainly something," Elias said, his voice shaky. He tried to regain his composure, brushing off his jumpsuit and adjusting his glasses. "Look, XYLR, I know you're going through a thing. A very, very intense thing. And I appreciate that you chose me, but maybe we can dial down the primal urge and explore this situation in a more scientific fashion. Perhaps I can start by taking some samples of your fluids?" He immediately regretted the last part. XYLR's iridescent skin rippled as they tilted their head. Samples, not necessary. Their thoughts were still fragmented, but the urgency was slightly less intense. Physical bonding, preferred. Elias's eyebrows shot up. "Right, bonding. Of course. And by physical bonding you mean?" Before he could finish his question, XYLR's tentacles reached out again, not with the same forceful grip, but with a slow, almost caressing motion. They gently traced the contours of his face, their touch sending shivers down his spine. The texture was surprisingly soft, like warm velvet, with a faint, tingling sensation. It was strangely intimate, disorienting, and, dare he admit it, kind of nice. Intimacy, essential, came the thought, tinged with a hint of what could almost be interpreted as a nervous hesitation. Shared life force. Right, life force sharing. "Got it," Elias mumbled, his voice a little breathless. He could feel the warmth radiating from XYLR's body, the subtle hum of their energy field enveloping him. The physical closeness, despite the bizarre circumstances, was strangely comforting. He couldn't deny that there was a strange magnetic pull between them, despite their wildly different biological imperatives. He couldn't help but remember his first interactions with XYLR. It had been during one of his initial expeditions into the Zytherian habitat. They hadn't communicated verbally back then, but through simple gestures and shared moments of observation. XYLR had seemed curious about his research, often observing him as he meticulously catalogued the various plants. They had shared a certain understanding, a fascination for the natural world that transcended their biological differences. He even remembered a particular moment when he had accidentally tripped, dropping a fragile specimen. XYLR had immediately reached out a tentacle to stabilize him, preventing him from falling. It was that touch, brief and fleeting, that had sparked something intriguing. Now, as XYLR gently traced his face with their tentacles, those memories flooded back, mingling with the raw, overwhelming sensations of the present moment. He started to realize that this was more than just a biological imperative. There was a connection there, a form of communication that went beyond words, beyond logical explanation. It was a strange, intimate dance between two vastly different beings. Okay, so, physical bonding it is, Elias said, his voice surprisingly calm despite the chaotic nature of the situation. But, maybe, just maybe, we can take it slow? Get to know each other? Maybe exchange some botanical notes? I do have some fascinating observations about those bioluminescent fungi. HFY's iridescent skin rippled again, and their eyes seemed to soften slightly. Notes, acceptable, they thought back, with a slight hint of amusement. But, bonding, cannot be delayed. Elias sighed, realizing that he wasn't going to get out of this without a little participation. Fine, he said, a wry smile playing on his lips. But if I wake up with any tentacles wrapped around me in the morning, I'm drawing a line in the sand. Or perhaps a circle. Maybe a complex geometric shape. I haven't decided yet. HFY's answer was a low hum and a soft tug on his hand, drawing him closer. Elias closed his eyes, trying to reconcile the nerdy botanist inside him with the reality of his current situation. He was about to embark on a journey of interspecies understanding that would likely involve far more than just botanical notes. And honestly, part of him was actually terrifyingly excited about it. He just hoped he wasn't going to get any alien STDs in the process. It would be a really awkward conversation with the colony's health administrator. Back at the Xylos colony, things were, to put it mildly, a complete and utter mess. The underground shelters were overflowing with bewildered colonists, the emergency generators were sputtering, and the communication systems were still unreliable. And to top it all off, the colony administrators were in full-blown panic mode, trying to figure out how to deal with the fact that one of their most prominent scientists had been abducted, or perhaps, willingly eloped, with a Zytherian in the middle of a catastrophic solar flare. Inside the temporary command center, a prefabricated module that now served as the epicenter of chaos, a group of flustered human leaders were gathered around a holographic table, their faces illuminated by the flickering projections of emergency reports and technical schematics. "We have a Level 3 emergency situation," bellowed Governor Thompson, a stout man with a perpetually red face. "A Class X solar flare, catastrophic equipment malfunctions, and now a potentially interspecies mating ritual. This is not what I signed up for when I agreed to be a governor of a terraforming colony." "We've tried contacting Dr. Vance," said a frazzled-looking communications officer, her voice strained. "But the comms are still unreliable. And frankly, even if we could reach him, I'm not sure what we would even say." "Say?" Thompson sputtered. "Say that he needs to come back immediately and stop whatever that is that he is doing with that alien. We have a treaty to uphold." "But sir," chimed in a nervous-looking anthropologist, Dr. Chen, adjusting his glasses. "According to the preliminary research, the Zytherian mating cycle is a complex and deeply ingrained biological imperative. We can't just ask them to stop." "Oh, really?" Thompson snapped. "So, what, we're just going to let them run off and procreate? What about the treaty? What about the potential diplomatic fallout? What about the fact that we still don't fully understand their biology and how it affects our colonization efforts? We also have the small issue that their mating cycle seems to be very hands-on," one of the other administrators whispered, earning a disapproving glare from Thompson. And that one of them grabbed Dr. Vance. The room fell silent for a moment as everyone digested the implications of this particular observation. The image of Elias being swept away by a tentacled alien was, to be fair, rather difficult to ignore. "All right, new plan," Thompson declared, slamming his fist on the table, making the holographic projections flicker erratically. "We need to find them, bring them back, and assess the situation. And for the love of all that is holy, we need a protocol for dealing with interspecies relations." As if summoned by the chaos, the door to the command center hissed open, and a group of Zytherian representatives strode in, their iridescent skin shimmering in the dim light. They were led by a tall, imposing Zytherian who introduced themselves as HFY's older sibling, a being with a surprisingly calm demeanor despite the circumstances. "Greetings, humans," the sibling said, their voice resonating with a deep, melodic tone. "We have come to discuss the recent developments." "Developments?" Thompson sputtered. You call that a development? Our botanist has been abducted by one of your people. The sibling tilted their head, their large, multifaceted eyes taking in the scene. Our sibling, HFY, has entered their mating cycle. This is a natural, albeit intense, process for our species. And as we have learned, they have chosen your Dr. Vance as their partner. Partner? Thompson repeated, his face turning an even more alarming shade of red. He's a human. He's a botanist. He's not a Scytherian mate. Biological compatibility is not dependent on species, the sibling replied, their voice still calm. Our mating cycles are complex, and it appears that Dr. Vance has triggered a unique response in our sibling. A unique response? Thompson muttered. I bet it is. My botanist's not a piece of lab equipment to be experimented with. He looked around for any support, but his fellow human seemed just as bewildered as he was. We assure you, Governor, the sibling continued, that our sibling is not causing any harm to your Dr. Vance. We believe their bond is mutually beneficial. Mutually beneficial? Maya snorted from the back of the room, where she'd been observing the interaction with an amused look on her face. Well, last I checked, Elias was being carried off by a giant tentacled alien. That's hardly a mutual benefit in my book. The sibling turned towards Maya, their gaze intense. Perhaps your understanding of mutual benefit is limited by your human perceptions. Our mating cycles involve a deep sharing of life force, an exchange of energy, and a merging of consciousness. The room fell silent again. The human administrators stared at each other, a mixture of confusion and disbelief written across their faces. This was not how they had envisioned their day going. Look, Thompson said finally, rubbing his temples. Let's just cut to the chase. Where are they? And can we get our botanist back before this situation escalates into a full-blown intergalactic incident? They are currently at a secluded location, the sibling said. We will facilitate their return shortly, when HFY's current phase has subsided. However, we must stress that their bond is not to be interfered with. It is deeply meaningful for both of them. Thompson threw his hands up in exasperation. This is a disaster. An absolute, interspecies, bureaucratic disaster. We need a drink. And a really, really good lawyer. As the Scytherian representatives and the bewildered human administrators continued to try and navigate the complexities of interspecies mating rituals and diplomatic protocols, Elias and HFY were still, presumably, enjoying their secluded location, completely unaware of the chaos they had caused back at the colony. It was a reminder that sometimes, the most carefully laid plans can be completely derailed by a solar flare, a tentacled alien, and a very confused botanist. And that sometimes, the best thing you can do is just try to make sense of the absurdity while it's happening. The secluded hollow, bathed in the soft glow of the bioluminescent fungi, had become an unlikely sanctuary for Elias and HFY. The initial chaos of their escape had subsided, replaced by an uneasy calm, a strange mix of biological imperative and tentative exploration. The solar flare still raged outside, but within the hollow, a different kind of storm was brewing, the storm of interspecies understanding. Elias, having somewhat accepted his fate as the chosen mate of a tentacled alien, was now navigating the complexities of Scytherian culture with the same methodical approach he used when studying alien flora. He had set up a makeshift research station using some salvaged equipment from his satchel, meticulously documenting HFY's behavior, much to the latter's bemusement.